reconciliation and address the most critical human rights challenges. We call on all members of this Council to support this resolution. Thank you, Madam President.
And I have been informed by the Secretariat that there is one additional co-sponsor. I now give the floor to members of the Council who wish to make general comments. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the EU member states that are members of the Human Rights Council. This general comment has been agreed by the EU as a whole. We thank the cross-regional group for presenting this very balanced resolution. Reconciliation, accountability, and human rights in Sri Lanka have been considered in the Human Rights Council for many years, including through consensual resolutions in previous years. The EU regrets that the government of Sri Lanka has withdrawn its support to these resolutions. We are concerned about a setback of the important gains made. It is key that the Human Rights Council signals the international community's continued support for post-conflict reconciliation and accountability in Sri Lanka. This resolution is also important given the warning signs of a deteriorating human rights situation, including erosion of democratic checks and balances, rise of exclusionary rhetoric, intensified surveillance and intimidation of CSOs, human rights defenders and victims, as well as discrimination of persons belonging to religious and ethnic minority communities. The EU is deeply concerned about these developments. We call on the government of Sri Lanka to continue to promote reconciliation, accountability, and human rights in Sri Lanka, including through cooperation on this resolution. For the above-mentioned reasons, the EU supports Resolution L1/Rev1 and hopes it will be adopted by this Council by consensus.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam President. The Philippines engaged actively in the consultations on this draft resolution. We are disappointed that the pen holders did not take on board in a balanced manner the perspectives and positions of Sri Lanka. We note that Sri Lanka engaged in the informals in good faith, even after the failure of the OHCHR to adhere to high standards of transparency, objectivity, and fairness in reporting. We regret that the pen holders repeated this failure and did not take the opportunity to promote the consultations as a platform to uphold these principles and maintain a discourse based on reason. Three things are clear in this resolution. First, it pursues a political agenda that is blind to reason and methods of reasoning. Second, the mandate given to the OHCHR will require a budget of $2.8 billion, mostly for salaries of 12 new hires. We regret the late posting of this information, and in this regard, we call on the Council to examine this practice that relegates the budget and the other practical implications of a resolution as an afterthought rather than factors in our decision-making as they should be. Third, this mandate is contemplated against a possible non-cooperation of Sri Lanka, and therefore resources are likely to go to waste if our benchmark is effective action and impact on the ground. Madam President, the rest of the elements of this draft resolution are sketchy and unmoored, particularly its vision of a role for the OHCHR in collecting evidence and developing strategies for future accountability processes. These usurp the role of the state as duty bearer. While recognizing that no country has a perfect record on human rights, the Philippines has appreciated that the government of Sri Lanka has pursued reconciliation, accountability, and human rights through inclusive domestic processes. This is despite severe challenges in its resources and post-conflict security situation. There is no merit in actions by the Council that disrespect these national processes and are driven by simplistic generalizations of complex conditions on the ground. Many of us in Geneva are sheltered from the actual experience of terrorism, conflict, and socioeconomic challenges that are everyday realities to Sri Lanka's 21 million people. This is a handicap that prevents some Council members from being more sober in their judgments about the situation in Sri Lanka and from flexing the powers of the Council more wisely. Madam President, the Philippines will vote no on this resolution, and we ask other Council members to apply wisdom, responsibility, and sobriety on this matter and do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. And are there any other delegations who wish to make general comments? I see none, and we shall now hear from the concerned country. I will give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Madam President, it is deeply regrettable that a group of countries has tabled a country-specific resolution against Sri Lanka in spite of Sri Lanka's consistent and constructive engagement with the Human Rights Council and with the proponents of the resolution themselves. Sri Lanka considers the draft resolution to be unwarranted, unjustified, and in violation of the relevant articles of the United Nations Charter, in particular, Article 2, subsection 7, and relevant sections of the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 60/251 that provides for the mandate of the Human Rights Council. It is based on the rejected report of the OHCHR on Sri Lanka, which was tabled at this session, and which violates the principles of sovereign equality of all states and non-interference in internal affairs. The resolution is presented without the consent of Sri Lanka as the country concerned and is therefore unhelpful and divisive. No country has a greater interest in bringing about reconciliation among its peoples than the country concerned, a point that has repeatedly been emphasized during the proceedings of this council. The list of co-sponsors of the resolution amply demonstrates the divisive nature of this resolution. Madam President, Sri Lanka categorically rejects the unprecedented proposal in OP 6 of this resolution to expand the role of the OHCHR. This is a dangerous precedent and will have wide-ranging implications for all countries. All members of this council will agree that this body cannot assume tasks not assigned to it by the UN General Assembly in Resolution 60/251 or in subsequent resolutions. In addition, I cannot emphasize enough the dangers posed to all nations, particularly those of the Global South, by the trajectory taken in this resolution, which is urging action on the basis of emerging trends and warning signs, that is, events that have not yet happened. In this context, it is highly regrettable that the draft resolution that has been presented today appears to have ignored all these reservations and concerns. Against this background, I call upon all members of this council to objectively assess whether Sri Lanka represents a situation that warrants the financial and human resources and the urgent attention of this council in this exaggerated and polarized manner at a time of severe financial constraints indicated by the Secretariat. Over $2.8 million is the estimated cost of this exercise, and over a dozen new staff members are to be recruited according to the PBI. Madam President, notwithstanding the stated objectives of the proponents of the resolution, Sri Lanka is of the view that this resolution will polarize Sri Lankan society and adversely affect economic development, peace, and harmony. For all the above reasons, Sri Lanka rejects this draft resolution and requests the members of this council to reject this resolution by a vote. Thank you.
I have been informed by the Secretariat that there are PBIs in the amount of $2,856,300, and copies of the statement were posted on the extranet. I'll now give the floor to members of the Council who wish to make explanations of votes before the vote on the draft proposal. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Madam President, China commends the Sri Lanka government for its commitment to promoting and protecting human rights, promoting sustainable economic and social development, improving people's living standards, safeguarding the rights of vulnerable groups, promoting national reconciliation and combating terrorism. We congratulate the Sri Lanka government on its achievements in these areas. According to GA Resolution 60/251, the work of the HRC should follow the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity. All parties should promote and protect human rights through genuine dialogue and cooperation, and refrain from double standards and politicizing human rights issues. We advocate that all countries should observe the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, respect the sovereignty and independence of other countries, and abandon the practice of interfering in other countries' internal affairs, undermining other countries' sovereignty and international cooperation under the pretext of human rights. The sponsors of Draft Resolution L1 Rev 1 disregards the efforts and achievements by the Sri Lanka government to promote and protect human rights, ignores the wishes of the Sri Lanka people, and interferes in Sri Lanka's internal affairs under the guise of human rights, and disrupts the excellent situation of Sri Lanka's development and stability. This doesn't help to promote and protect human rights. Rather, it's a typical example of politicizing human rights. The HRC should not facilitate this dangerous trend. To safeguard the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the principles established in GA Resolution 60/251, China requests a vote on Draft Resolution L1 Rev 1 and will vote against it. We call on the HRC members to jointly vote against this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan recognizes the need for improvement regarding the human rights situation in Sri Lanka, as well as the need for further efforts towards national reconciliation in the country.
Governments of the countries which have promoted these draft resolutions have themselves committed and are still committing serious human rights violations, yet they themselves have never been the subject of similar initiatives. Sri Lanka is cooperating actively with this Council and its mechanisms and with the OHCHR, demonstrating major headway made in the promotion and protection of the human rights of its people. This draft resolution is entirely unwarranted, for which reason it should be rejected by the members of the Security Council, and we call upon them all to vote against it. For all of the aforementioned reasons, Venezuela energetically and categorically opposes draft resolution L1 Rev 1, and we will vote against. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. The Russian delegation once again reaffirms its position about the fact that it is not acceptable for the Council to consider politicized country resolutions. Experience has shown that these rarely improve the situation of human rights on the ground. On the contrary, they tend to drive the state concerned away from constructive cooperation with international human rights mechanisms. A clear example of this is the draft resolution on promoting reconciliation, accountability and human rights in Sri Lanka. Instead of trying to support the country's delegation and encourage it to engage in dialogue, the sponsors of the draft resolution have preferred to continue using a former practice of making allegations against it. This draft resolution does not reflect balance or objectivity. Therefore, the Russian Federation will vote against this draft resolution, and we call on other states, members of the HRC, to follow suit. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. The Human Rights Council should prioritize cooperation and constructive and respectful dialogue, and universal mechanisms such as the UPR should be used as the sole guarantee of ensuring that we fairly and not on a selective basis address human rights issues and concerns. The resolution before us currently does not enjoy the support of Sri Lanka. The government of this country has provided clear and convincing and abundant proof on its position with regard to this resolution, and that should be respected. For that reason, that draft resolution will only further serve the ends of politicization, bias and double standards which have crept into this forum and which should be decried. We agree with the opinion and the concerns that have been flagged by previous speakers about the prevention component contained within this draft resolution. And we're also concerned about the mandate that we are seeking to confer upon the OHCHR if we adopt this resolution, calling upon them or granting them the right to compile evidence as a precursor to future trials. Cuba will continue to uphold the basic principles of cooperation, dialogue and exchange between all countries, and to do so on the basis of the content of the United Nations Charter. President, we reject this draft resolution. It does not refer to issues related to the PBI that will be entailed by its adoption. There's certainly not been enough discussion on the imputed PBIs. For all of these reasons, we will vote against this resolution.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Madam President, India believes in the primary responsibility of the states for the promotion and protection of human rights and constructive international dialogue and cooperation guided by the principles and purposes of the UN Charter in support of such efforts. As an immediate neighbor, India has contributed to the relief, resettlement, rehabilitation, and reconstruction process in Sri Lanka after 2009. Our development assistance has focused on the restoration of livelihoods and economic revival, especially in Sri Lanka's northern and eastern provinces. Madam President, India's approach to the question of human rights in Sri Lanka is guided by two fundamental considerations. One is our support to the Tamils of Sri Lanka for equality, justice, dignity, and peace. The other is in ensuring the unity, stability, and territorial integrity of Sri Lanka. We have always believed that these two goals are mutually supportive, and Sri Lanka's progress is best assured by simultaneously addressing both objectives. India supports the call by the international community for the government of Sri Lanka to fulfill its commitments on the devolution of political authority, including through the early holding of elections for provincial councils, and to ensure that all provincial councils are able to operate effectively in accordance with the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution. At the same time, we believe that the work of OHCHR should be in conformity with the mandate given by the relevant resolutions of the UN General Assembly. We would urge that the government of Sri Lanka carries forward the process of reconciliation, address the aspirations of Tamil community, and continues to engage constructively with the international community to ensure that the fundamental freedoms and human rights of all its citizens are fully protected. I thank you, Madam President.
Lifetraveler Reader's Digest Barge YouTube Nalikawa.